So I'm Carol Hyam. I'm a lecturer in the history department. My specialty is Native American and comparative history. And historians do things differently than other people because we don't come up with our theories ahead of time. We have to work with what documents are available, what those documents tell us. And I study race, and I look at how race is defined by the documents, by the time periods, and then how those images of race then define policy. And that's how we know race. And because I'm a historian, that's how I'm able to understand systemic racism, because you see the seeds of current policies in the past. You see how those get embedded into the system and then people can't get out of them. I'm also a big believer that education can be closed to some people, and that our job as educators is to make education as open and as available as possible by recognizing in ways that it is intentionally and unintentionally less welcoming to different people and dinners, and working on that to make it more available. Understanding that college and universities have their own cultures, and those cultures themselves have their own strictures and endemic problems that need to be addressed to make them more open.
I am Deborah C. Smith, and I am an associate professor in the Africana Studies Department. And Carol and I have quite a bit in common in that we study race and representation of certain populations. And so I consider myself to be a critical media theorist. And what I do is I realize that a lot of what we think we know about race is defined through the lens of media. And so I look at how media has used a hierarchy to portray people in different ways, often with a dominant culture at the top, and then the othering of anybody who is not dominant culture. And so as part of my study, I interrogate media for those kind of simplistic representations of race, and how they often rely on like stereotype and adherence to this kind of race caste system where these old rules and assumptions center a dominant culture that often doesn't have dark skin. And so that's how in my work, I study race and I know about race and feel that media perpetuates these stereotypes about race.
I'm Dan Radinovich. I've been at UNC Charlotte for 24 years. I'm in the chemistry department. And even though the field may seem like it is very different from what Carol and Deborah do, we are all in the same college, and we have lots of things in common in terms of how we approach problems, how we analyze data, and that's why we are all in the same college, and this is not arts or engineering. And in chemistry, there's lots of things that you may think are not related to race and racism. We think, oh, science is very objective. That's really why am I here? But there are lots of issues. There are lots of issues, from the fact that there is a clear underrepresentation of minorities in STEM disciplines. And it's not only in terms of race, but it can be women, it can be all kinds of reasons. And why is that? And so when we do research, when we interact with students, chemistry, of course, is a very practical field. So we do the research with students all the time. We have to be mindful of the different backgrounds, the different career goals, how we approach problems, the things that are not, strictly speaking, in the realm of science. Science may be very objective, but we are all humans trying to do this research. And so there is more in common than one thinks with other disciplines. And so in this discussion, we are really just trying to present the different flavors in our field, in our fields. But I guess we'll see where the discussion takes us. Yeah.
So one of the questions is, what do we know? And I would say, looking at it from a media perspective, if you start with like 1950s TV and come all the way to 2020, the most successful television shows and even films tend to portray African Americans, especially, as ugly, savage, happy servant, sidekick, and those images seem to have been replicated, just for years. I mean, you can just count on them year after year. I'm always watching for the new flock of television shows to see if there's anything different. And when they do try to stray away from those portrayals, those shows aren't usually successful because people have been subconsciously influenced to see African Americans through that lens. But I always say that if you were to kind of disturb or interrogate that template, you would see that to promote African Americans historically as being savage or happy servants really was a way to preserve the institution of slavery. To say that if they are free, they will prey on white skin, they will be savage, or they are most comfortable in this role as a happy servant, as a domestic. This is the best thing for them. And then to look at African Americans as ugly is clearly contrasting their features to a standard of whiteness. So when we ask that question, how do we know what we know and what is it that we know? And I take it back to just kind of interrogating these media portrayals.
So we're in the discussion part and talking about stereotypes and how, well, not only minorities, but say how scientists are portrayed in the media. There's plenty of stereotypes because what you do about what people see as a mad scientist or Frankenstein or whatever, it's so different from what chemists do in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it used to be those sort of either ugly or funny stereotypes. In more recent years, there have been a lot for chemistry. There have been lots of these crime investigation type shows, and they are kind of, pretty looking maybe, but they are completely unrealistic. And so the media, how the media portrays reality is well, it's not very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is things that I mean, I think it's part of every field.
Yeah, and really interestingly, because you talk about mad scientists and all these kind of template portrayals of scientists, but rarely is there like Black scientists. And then so Hidden Figures, what a great name, because the Hidden Figures were scientists that, marginalized. A lot of people didn't even know about them until that film came out.
Yes. Yeah. Great movie. I think one of the actual scientists passed away just a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
He was like 100
Recently.
101 or something. Yes. Yeah.
And they're going to name one of the NASA buildings after her.
Oh, okay.
So they just announced, which is very exciting. Which is, when I watch the media, I get so upset because there are never episodes dealing with Native American topics until Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
You can actually sit and go through it and be like, and people still, that's Native American month, but why is Native American month on Thanksgiving? Why is that? Why did they pair those two together?
Yes.
And there's all this stuff about the mascots going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so it's a constant issue. And then COVID, of course, has affected Native American communities in an outside proportion. Mm-hmm. And people are shocked by that, like, because Native Americans are there all the time. They aren't just there at Thanksgiving. They don't, just like I don't use a textbook, Deborah, in my survey class because African Americans only show up for slavery. They don't show up for anything else. Right. So I don't use a textbook because I find it just reinforces this false impression.
Same.
It drives me crazy. The world is such a rich and interesting place if we just embrace it and quit trying to make it so simple.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's, for me, what we know and what we don't know. I mean, one of the things I've learned over the years is even before there are categories of race, historically speaking, there were religious categories, and that humans always want to categorize other people to influence their own group. And so we always have to be aware of that and watching for that, for our own tendencies to separate the world and subdivide it. And that even goes within academia. Sciences and humanities, the humanities think the sciences are preferred, the sciences think the humanities are preferred. We're always coming up with these ways to categorize and rank. We can't just let things be. So it just trickles over everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the methodology. I was talking the other day to a student who is pre-med, and I was saying, yes, like doing research, what you really try to do is develop the skills that you could use later in life. Doesn't matter if you're doing research in chemistry or history or psychology. There's all kinds of similarities between the approach. That if you are committed to an area that you are studying, if you ask questions, if you are keep an open mind, that is what I think, to a large extent, education in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences is all about. It's about inquiry. It's about being open-minded. Not to think that when you study history or Native Americans we were joking a week ago, is the movie Dances with Wolves, or that chemistry is mad scientists, or that the media portrays different groups of people in certain way for whatever reasons, marketing or whatever, but that's not really necessarily reality, and we have to constantly try to question the information we receive and draw our own conclusions, and that's common to all these areas.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, we talked about Dances with Wolves last week, but I also think you shouldn't be ashamed to use anything as a launching point for your curiosity. You can love the movies Dances with Wolves and then take class with me and realize there's some problems with Dances with Wolves. You can love it as a dramatic piece, but then it helped broaden your information. And the same goes with people one-to-one. Last week when we talked, we had made different assumptions about each other. Then as we talked, we realized those assumptions were different than the reality, but that was enlightening and that was great. And that's what college and life is about. Like, you meet someone and you think you guys have something in common and you don't, or you think you don't have something in common and you do. And that's what makes life so interesting and so much more fun, instead of going in and trying to find people who are exactly like you, which makes life really boring. Or at least I think so.
I agree. I love that, and I love that Dan was saying the practice of inquiry. One of the things I really believe in is this thing about disturbing the sounds of silence. And I feel like I date myself because it's from the Simon and Garfunkel song that I used to love. And I truly believe in it because I talked to you guys last week about this idea of this gaze versus voice. And I gaze at you and I see a skin color. And so I draw on these stereotypes that I have about a skin color. But when I hear your voice, like I did last week, and I learned so much more, the practice of inquiry requires that we disturb the sounds of silence and that we not rely on these easy ways of categorizing people, often promoted by media, disturbing the sounds of silence, hearing somebody's voice.
Well, disturbing the categories. So I have a question for Deborah, and Daniel, you're welcome to hop in too. So all these editorial boards are now capitalizing the word Black, but not necessarily adding the word white before. The default has always been like there was a person involved in a crime and a black or brown person committed the crime, or vice versa, there was a black victim and a person, and the person is implied white. This has bugged me for years as an editor, that it's got to be even. Either everybody has a race or nobody has a race. And now all these editorial boards are capitalizing black, but not necessarily adding white in. So I just wondered what your thoughts about that were. Sciences, I study history of science, and science would, in the 19th century, would say, well, we don't have to because that's the standard, and all the other races are off the standard. But I don't know how science views that today, and I don't know, since you study the media, how you feel about this issue.
Yeah, and I always put that under the category of othering people. There's the standard of whiteness, the ideal American, and then everyone else is other. And so to assume that you're always talking white unless you specify that it's another race is absolutely ridiculous to me, to answer your question. And you know, I get fired up about that quite a bit, because it just reinforces these notions of hierarchy, of this standard, and everything else is other and has to be identified.
Yeah, one of my pet peeves is the NBA and the WNBA.
Oh, same here. Or the Tar Heels and the Lady Tar Heels.
Yes.
Tar Heels.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's crazy. We deal with that all the time. So let's say there's a research paper out there that doesn't give the first name of the author, just the initials, right? And most people will assume that, oh, it's a guy, right? And that, so it's just it's everywhere, and it's crazy how without really a bad intention, but society makes lots of assumptions about gender, about race, about people, and the world is and should be portrayed as a lot more diverse than what some people believe. And so yes, that is so funny about men, women, and all that. All that is yeah.
Actually, for the first part of my career, I only published under for that reason. And I got invited to conferences, and I'd show up and people would be like, female. I'm like, yeah. You know, that was the assumption. So, you know, just I made that conscious choice because I knew that was the assumption. And because when I wasn't publishing under my initials, people assumed I only did women's history. And so it was just this just downward trajectory. So if you're a woman, then you must only be interested in women, and you must only be interested in women who are Native American, not you're interested in the whole thing.
Wow.
So, but they never say that to men. You must be only interested in men, you know, because you're a man. So yeah, those daily assumptions, just they fascinate me, and it sort of almost becomes a game. Like, can you find the daily assumption?
I love one of the questions that was that we're to talk about is this idea of what is in dispute. I was thinking about this yesterday. What is in dispute about race? And I think a lot of it has to do with our not really being progressive about how we talk about race, because I keep hearing diversity and inclusion. And to me, that sounds like getting the percentages up of certain races so that we can measure them. And it's like we're taking a quantitative approach as opposed to a more qualitative approach. And I just feel like what is in dispute about race is that we don't tend to use the words justice or equity or humanity when we're talking about race. And I just think in terms of media, and we were, Carol, you just posed a question to me about naming a person as Black. It just makes those semiotics and codes behind the camera come right in front of us as individuals. People start to believe these things about race because we're not talking about race, humanity, equity, all of those things, the fullness of it.
Mm-hmm. And people don't think when you're talking about like affirmative action and stuff, people don't realize it's representing underrepresented, not specific groups. So for instance, years ago, I was up for a job at a tribal college and I would have been a diversity hire because they didn't get many white applicants. Mm-hmm. And so people were like, but you can't be a diversity hire in that context. Yes. So if people would think about when are you sort of the difference and when are you not, mm-hmm. then people would be more empathetic. And I always feel like I have a window into this. My husband and I lived in North Africa for a year while he did his graduate research. And boy, did I stand out. And boy, did I deal with stereotypes about how people interacted with me, how they approached me, mm-hmm. and what they saw versus what they heard. Mm-hmm. And it was right after the first Gulf War, which is really dating myself, but people had a very strong feeling against Americans. And I became very conscious that I represented all Americans. And whatever I did, if I lost my temper or got frustrated waiting in a long line somewhere, everybody assumed things about me. Mm-hmm. And so I think I was very lucky and blessed because it gave me a sense of when you stand out and you represent everybody, when you're the tip of the iceberg, how much pressure there is on you for that, mm-hmm. and how much you have to think about that, and also recognize that people are making assumptions about you. Yes. To really date myself, the young boys in the neighborhood always called me Madonna because Madonna was the only sort of blonde American they knew. So they would call me Madame Madonna because that was who they recognized as like an American. And I'm just sort of put up with it because I was like, I don't even know where to start with this.
Where were you? What country?
We were in Tunisia.
Wow.
My husband's a North African specialist, and Tunisia was the only country open to Americans at that point. So, and my husband is from East Tennessee, but olive complected with dark hair. So he fit in and he spoke fluent Arabic. And I barely spoke any Arabic and my French was rusty. And when I had hair color, it was reddish blonde, and I don't tan, I turn red. So I stood out on every metric. And I looked like a tourist all the time. So people treated me like a tourist all the time. You know, someone temporarily coming to have pleasure in that country and then leave. And then it was after we'd been in our neighborhood for a couple of weeks, people started coming up and asking me who I was and why I was still there and treated me very differently after that.
Yeah.
You know, but it gave me a really good window into stereotypes and how people respond. And ironically, I was finishing my dissertation on stereotypes and policy. And it's like, oh, I'm living this. So, but, you know, you got to say hi to everyone. You know, my mom gave me advice when I was in junior high. Be nice to everyone and figure out who you have the most in common with and make them your friends. And I think that's a good rule for life. Just be nice to everyone and then figure out who you've got in common with instead of assuming that that person's going to be my friend and that person's not going to be my friend.
Yeah, and the best way to know that is to have a conversation with them. Disturb the sounds of silence. Speaking of dating oneself.
Yes. I mean, we were sharing some stories a week ago when we met for the first time, but there are lots and lots of stories. One that I haven't told before is periodically. I am originally, I'll say this for the sake of the audience, I'm originally from Peru. So when I go there every 3 or 4 years, part of me feels like a tourist because I have been in the US for 30 years now. So I may speak the language, you know, Spanish, but I don't really, I've lost track of popular TV shows or politics or whatnot. And I remember 2 years ago, I was there for the last time and I got into a taxi. And in taxis in Peru, you just always sit in the front and the driver always starts talking to you. And then completely out of the blue, he asked me, so who's winning this afternoon? I think he was talking about a soccer game. And I have no idea. I mean, it was like a major soccer game and I have no idea what he was talking about. And I said like, oh, I don't know. So, and that's the feeling that you get sometimes about being a stranger in your own land.
Mhm.
And just like that, there are so many stories that over time trained all of us on being aware of uh, the different backgrounds, the different people, different students we encounter, students who may have never really had contact before with a non-native speaker or with someone who is Jewish or whatever. And so then it is one of the things that the students starting now will experience. And so UNC Charlotte could be really a lot more diverse than what you probably saw in any high school. And so that's something to keep in mind. I mean, there's still a lot to do, but that's just one additional factor that changes when you go from high school to college. Right? You're not in high school anymore. Lots and lots of things change, and one is the to some extent, the diversity of the people you will encounter, your peers, instructors, staff, and it's probably a lot more than what you are used to seeing in high school.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little piece of the world right at UNC Charlotte.
Yeah, I mean, when I started 24 years ago, I was the first non-native speaker hired in the department. The department chair at that time didn't even know what's a green card, how do you hire someone who is not from the US, and people started learning, and now there's several colleagues in the department who are from other countries, and that's normal. Charlotte, of course, has changed a lot in the last 24 years. So that's, I think, it's exciting. It's exciting, and it is one of the aspects of the college experience that hopefully everyone will experience soon, especially when you could be on campus and start interacting with faculty and staff and your peers, not just through Zoom like we are doing right now.
But that's one of the great advantages that UNC Charlotte has that other schools don't have. You have lots of opportunities, if you take them, to meet people that will expand your world. So there are lots of colleges where you see the same type of people as yourself, and that doesn't give you a chance to try new ideas or learn about new things. And you have a chance to talk to people that have totally different experiences than you, but that doesn't mean they have different values or different ideas than you. And so it's a wonderful place to really explore those ideas and to have conversations, hard conversations about race, about inequity, about politics. Mm-hmm. But those conversations only work if you really listen.
I always promote study abroad for students. But for those who can't, I say, you have this wonderful space for cultural immersion with so many different types of people. If you just get away from the people that you're comfortable with and get to know some of the other 29,990 people at UNC Charlotte. And so this is an amazing opportunity for you to get to know someone and someone else's culture and know more about them than what you are assuming them to be. So what a great space for just cultural immersion. Especially since you can't really go out of the country right now.
Yes. I don't know if this year we will have an international festival, for example.
Oh, that's amazing.
I suspect not.
Yeah, no.
I haven't heard anything, but that's sooner or later we'll have the international festivals again, and that's a wonderful opportunity to see what's going on campus and the community at large.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm sure they're going to have things like online movie nights and other things that students can hop into. And it's the perfect time Because I know for some students, it's getting out of your dorm room and going to do things is the barrier. But now just, if you see something listed online that you want to try, then click on it and do it. And if you don't like it, you can always leave. But you're going to find things you like that you didn't know existed. And that's what makes college and travel and living abroad and moving around the country so interesting. I've lived in, I think it's 9 states. And each one, there are things I loved about it, and each thing, there are things I didn't like about it. But, it helped me figure out what I liked and what I didn't like because I tried those things. If I'd stayed in the same place over and over again, I wouldn't have explored those things and learned things about myself. Mm-hmm. So we're constantly changing organisms, and we need to feed that change, like yeast, like sourdough. I think we're at our time limit, so I don't know if we want to wrap up. So any final thoughts for the students?
Well, one of the things, I've mentioned already, but to me, the key part of the college experience is to stay open-minded, because that's one of the key differences with high school. This is about figuring out the world, about learning. Probably, I would say, even especially outside the classroom, and really becoming gaining an education and getting ready to become a productive citizen. It is a wonderful time. It's the 4 years in college. It's the best time of your lives. But the key is to stay open-minded, because if you just hang out with the same little group like you maybe were doing in high school, that is a missed opportunity. So open-minded in terms to what you study, who you hang out with, the people you meet, the experiences, the activities, extracurricular activities. All of that is, I think, the key for a successful college experience.
I will answer that question by also just telling a little story. I was called a racial slur back in March in Red Robin. And ever since then, I've been wanting to talk back to the person that called me that. And so I've been wanting to say, well, I grew up in Stuttgart, Germany, and I could speak fluent German at one time. And I like to grow my own lavender, and I can't dance, and I eat too much junk food. I just wanted to let this person know the fullness of who I was, as opposed to what his lens decided that I was going to be. So I think my advice would be just allow your fellow students to live in the fullness of their voices, as opposed to your gaze and your assumptions and your stereotypes about them. And that requires a conversation.
And I'm going to piggyback on both of yours and say that there are going to be moments when you feel like you don't belong at UNCC, and you all belong at UNCC.
Yes.
So thank you everyone for attending.